Hi, this is John Harcher, and yeah, Titan delayed the 12th issue of Conan again. So I want to try to do the series all in one package, so I got to push back the regular episode again. So, since I picked up a couple things in the past month or so, past actually a couple months, let's do something we haven't done in a while. John looks at books. We'll do the Tolkien rundown of what they can use in the movies coming up and the stuff that they can't, but we can look at and see. It's like, well, you guys are going way off stray because, you could look at this, you just can't use it in the movies. Just don't contradict it. But let's see. So anyway, let's start off with, I would say, the basic Tolkien, catalog, if you want, just like for the regular reader, with maybe one other extra thing. So I'm going to pull these over here. Let me move one off first. So this is my basic Tolkien catalog here. So, whoop, wrong way. Let's flip this around. Let's start here. So we start with The Hobbit. That's basically, kids have to read this now. It's like their summer reading. So this is definitely now etched in stone as one of the staples of modern fantasy literature. And then, of course, the sequel, The Lord of the Rings, which the high school kids have on their reading lists. And as I know, I keep getting my son to try to read it, and he's like, I don't want to. I keep buying him shorter books. So anyway, so this is like I said, these are all the 1982 Valentine editions. So, the funny thing is I noticed that the books get shorter along the way. It's like, this one is like 572 pages, this one is 444, and this one's like 370 something, but then the appendices added in. So that was The Lord of the Rings. And then, finally, as we've done the story, and we'll do it again in a little bit. 1977, Silmarillion came out, which kind of works to plug in all the holes in Lord of the Rings. Like, what are they referring to? Who is this Beren and Luthien? What's this guy Turin? What was with that sword? All of it was in here. Numenor, the whole thing. Even though there was a little bit in the appendices, this had the whole story. So this is your basic package. This is the story as Tolkien kind of would have wanted it, just all together. I mean, I keep taking the wrong one off the wrong side. Okay. This is how he wanted to, see, I keep doing it backwards. All right, hang on. Let me get this right. We do this. Here we go. This is how Tolkien wanted The Lord of the Rings to be. He wanted this whole thing. And of course, they were like, look, we you can't finish up that Silmarillion thing, so let's just put out what we have and then go from there. So then, after Lord of the Rings is out, before the Silmarillion came out, Tolkien had a bunch of other writings, so they ended up putting out this, the Tolkien Reader. The main thing that this is attached with Middle-earth is the last thing, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which is sort of like The Hobbit. It was sort of created originally separate from the Middle-earth things he was working on since World War One, but because he included Tom in The Lord of the Rings, it kind of got tied in, so it's part of the lore now. So that's your basic Tolkien package. Now, the one other thing that was available at the time I got these, but now is a little bit priced out, is this is extremely helpful when you're doing any Lord of the Rings, Hobbit research. The Complete Guide to Middle-earth by Robert Foster. It's still in print, but it's like a hardcover. It's like very expensive. I think it's like almost like $50, and then a paperback version is like $45. So if you can scour the bookstores or eBay for this, you can do all sorts of fun things. And I'm sure the people doing the War of the Rohirrim movie are going through and just looking at Helm Hammerhand's entry. It's like, okay, we got to basically, 2.5 paragraphs. And they're going to make a whole movie out of that. So God bless them. So that was like the set catalog. This is like for regular readers. Then Christopher started doing, Tolkien's son Christopher started doing his digging into Dad's papers and started finding things. And the first thing he found, he put in this called Unfinished Tales. And basically the first part was the unfinished stories of the First Age. The Fall of Gondolin was basically he did a story, but before they even got to Gondolin, they didn't even get there. So instead of calling it the Fall of Gondolin, they called it the Coming to Gondolin. And then they had the Children of Hurin, who, for some reason, Tolkien was able to finish that story more than any of the other parts of the First Age. I guess it's because he based it on the Tale of Cuervo from the Kalevala. So it's like he had a template, he just had to change the things around and then put his characters in there. So that was and he called it the Narn I Hin Hurin. So that's it. Created his own language and named the story after it. And that was it. So there was only 2 parts there. Beren and Luthien. It was pretty. I guess he had most of the story written down. It just changed so many darn times. And then in the Second Age, the Aldarion and Erendis story, which is not something that got picked up later. And then he has a history of Galadriel and Celeborn, which sort of relates to the Rings of Power, but they can't use it. And then the Third Age, this is where they have the Quest for Erebor, which they couldn't use in The Hobbit, and the Hunt for the Ring, which they can't use in the Hunt for Gollum. So it's like, that's unfortunate. And then they also have things in the back of the, I got to get the name of the men right. The Battle of Fords of Ice, and is another thing. The Druidane, the Wild Men, he had something on that. And then he had a whole thing on the Istari, which is where he names the Blue Wizards, but as Jackson showed, he couldn't use it, so they had to make a joke out of it. So that must have sparked, so when he did that, that must have sparked something in Christopher's mind about putting together a complete history of Middle-earth, which he ended up doing pretty well on. He ended up making 13 volumes of it, 12 volumes of it, and then later people added a sort of unofficial 13th, which we're not going to talk about this time. We'll talk about next time because I have it on order. So anyway, if you remember an earlier podcast where I talked about the Book of Lost Tales, they had 2 volumes. The first 2 volumes of the History of Middle-earth came out in books 1 and 2. And I speculated then that had this come out in, let's say, 1924, 1926, in the days of Voyage to Arcturus, Ship of Ishtar, that era of War Ouroboros, like that era of fantasy, it would have been a classic in that sense, because it was basically what ended up the story of the Silmarillion, just a little expanded, a little more tied into Norse mythology with the necklace and everything. But, that's where the Elfwine, the guy who stumbles upon the stories, and then he gets told the story, so it's a flashback type of thing. So that would have been a classic had it been finished. But Tolkien didn't finish it. He decided to stop and then start writing a bunch of poems. And Christopher put them in here, the Lays of Beleriand. So the 3 main things in here were the Lay of Luthien, Released from Bondage, which is the story of Beren and Luthien, which is the one he started writing it, got about 2/3 of the way through, stopped, and then went off to do other things. And then when he went back to it, he decided to start over again and did 1/3 of it and then stopped. So that was that. That's the Lay of Luthien, who actually in the one of the deleted scenes in Fellowship of the Ring, Aragorn is singing from it. And then there's the Lay of the Children of Hurin, which he didn't finish, which, like I said, comes from the Narnai Hin Hurin. So instead of doing it in prose, he did it in poem and didn't finish it. And then Christopher also included the Lay of the Fall of Gondolin, but he got basically a couple of stanzas, and then just didn't go. So again, the three great tales of the First Age. And I'll show the books next time because I don't have them out, but I'll include them next time. But it's Beren and Luthien, Children of Hurin, and the Fall of Gondolin, with Arundel attached on to the last one. It's kind of finish up of the tales. So that was his next idea. So he started doing that and then stopped. And then he finally decided, let me just write this out. So that's where the Shaping of Middle-earth material comes in. This is mostly from, I think, 1926 through the early 30s, before he started playing around with the Hobbit stuff. Because that started like 1932. So anyway, this includes what's called the Quenta Nolderina, which is the only time. It's basically the same thing as in the Quenta Silmarillion, which was in the later books, but it's the only time he wrote it from beginning to end, without stopping and without having missing pieces. Because everywhere along the way, he ended up stopping and not finishing. Now, I believe it's the later. Let me double check because this went. Okay, yeah, the Quenta is in here, and this is the 1937 version. That after The Hobbit was done, and Unwin said, do you have anything else? He sent him this, and Unwin sent it back. Said, I don't understand that. Give me a sequel to The Hobbit. So that's in here. Then Christopher veered off a little bit and decided to talk about the Second Age, and the great tale there is called The Fall of Numenor, which Tolkien never wrote a full story of. He started when he was basically doing a bet with his buddy C.S. Lewis. I'll write it. I'm going to write a space story. So he wrote Out of the Silent Planet, and Tolkien started writing The Lost Road, and that's where he started dealing with the idea of their version of Atlantis, and if you read into it, sort of also Sodom and Gomorrah working itself in. Numenor is sort of a cross between the two of them. So he started working on that here. And, of course, didn't finish. And then by the time he put this aside, it was okay, time to go work on The Lord of the Rings. So he started that, 1938, after The Hobbit was out. And it took him until, the early 50s to finish. So when Christopher wrote that out, I think his intention was to write one book for each. One, summation of each of the Lord of the Rings books in here. But he had so much material, he basically ended up spilling over into the next volume. So, anyway, let's do this first. So the 3 volumes he had here were actually named after the titles of the books, because there are 6 books in Lord of the Rings, and each book is divided into, each book has 2 books in it. And originally Tolkien had titles in it, but he didn't use them. So Christopher decided to use the titles for these. And so the book on Fellowship of the Ring is Return of the Shadow. The book on the Two Towers is called The Treason of Isengard, and the book on Return of the King is War of the Ring. But he didn't finish. He had so much material, he couldn't fit it in a reasonable volume. So he's okay, let me just spill it over. So really book 6, for the most part, actually ended up in Sauron Defeated. Now, when they decided to do this paperback version, they decided to do a complete box set called The History of the Lord of the Rings. But they figured they didn't want to include all this in here. I'll get back to that in a minute. So what they did was they literally just broke it out and called it The End of the Third Age. Now, we have 5 different titles here for the There are two other titles that there were, and they're kind of boring. Literally, one is The Ring Goes South, and then the other one is The Ring Goes East. These are more interesting. So, yeah, that's Tolkien. Just, he couldn't write everything, so since he couldn't find good names for those two, he just left them out altogether. So the funny thing is, this combined is more than the original Lord of the Rings trilogy as it is. So there's a lot of things in here, a lot of development. It's very, very, very thoroughly researched. So then, he got to Sauron defeated, but then, he only had like a third of the book is detailed about Book 6 of Lord of the Rings. So then the next couple parts, there's actually two other parts dealt with, and it's actually relates to the Rings of Power. One was his second attempt at writing a novel about what happened to Numenor, and it's called the Notion Club Papers. It was kind of another time travel type of thing. He's kind of based the idea on the Inklings, which is the gang, the literary gang that he and C.S. Lewis were part of, and then from there they did the part of going to Numenor and getting the whole story of how that happened. And then he decided to try to write that again, just separately. So that was called The Drowning of Anandun. I don't know why he didn't call it The Drowning of Numenor, but he decided to use one of his other names in one of the other languages. So, and it was the third version of The Fall of Numenor. The first version was The Lost Road, the second version, Notion Club Papers, and then in here. So he definitely wanted to do something with this, just couldn't get it in place. So if they were to ever do a paperback version of just this, where, since we have the end of the Third Age, which I think you can buy that as a separate book too, if you wanted to get this other part of this book separately, and which I don't think they'll do at this point, but if they ever do, they could call it The Drowning of Anandun. So to kind of, they should tie it in, because it has to do with the Rings of Power, since that's Numenor and everything. So now, I have on order the other two books, but that mostly had to deal with Tolkien going back after he's done with Lord of the Rings and trying to do the Silmarillion, trying to whip that into shape, and he wasn't able to do it by 1957. And he wasn't able to get it done by the 60s, when, Unwin probably would have been like, yeah, look at how hot of Lord of the Rings is selling in paperback. Can you give me another book now? That, I think that's why the Tolkien reader ended up coming up, just to kind of do a little stopgap, just give people something else to read. And that came out before Smith of Wootton Major, which there's like a separate book that has Farmer Giles of Ham and Smith of Wootton Major as a book. So they now included it, I think, in Tales of the Perilous Realm. That's another book, which has another story by him called Roverdam, I think it is, about his dog. So there's a lot more Tolkien to come up, but right now I have only those two things on order. But then the interesting thing is, when Christopher Tolkien did book 12, he went back to the Lord of the Rings, did Peoples of Middle-earth, and this is basically about the appendices. So they more or less go with the Lord of the Rings book. So it's actually a good thing that I got this first. So this kind of works with those. And, you can read about, the very little that he wrote about Hammerhead. So what they're going to use the movie about. And, whatever he wrote about the Hunt for Gollum will be in there. That they probably can't use that either. So now the interesting thing is, again, it's mostly about the appendices. They have, how he came together with the Tale of Years for the Third Age and all that, and the making of Appendix A, the whole family there. And then part 2 is the later writing, so I'll hold off talking about that. This is like some of the things he did later to tie into the Silmarillion, plus the two last things he wrote about it, including the barely started sequel to Lord of the Rings, called The New Shadow, which he gave up because he's like, I couldn't really figure it out. But I think he may have had a story for that. He just kind of put it in the back of his mind. But a story that would have worked, maybe, if done properly, that would have been kind of like a conclusion to the whole saga. Because I'll hint this way, it would kind of give the Children of Hurin a happy ending. Maybe not a happy ending, but a more fitting conclusion than the absolute depression that it's in, which is why I think people would have a hard time dealing with that as like a movie or a TV show. I mean, I know Game of Thrones and House of Dragon have kind of made incest okay, but it's still kind of a touchy subject. You don't want to go too deep into it, especially for the way it happens in the Children of Hurin. So anyway, so that's a quick recap of History of Middle Earth, at least for what I have. And when Rings of Power comes out, I'll be able to dip in through all those and just see, because I know the Rings of, there's so much that they've already gone against the lore. The fact that the Astari are there, I know they better have a good explanation for it. Since they've gone so deep down there, we're like, okay, they're going to Rune, which makes sense because that's where the Land of Magic is. That's where Tom Bombadil will be. So we'll see how that explains together. This is there's so much open with it. It's you could see it maybe writing itself a little bit, or you could see it totally going off the rails. I do have to say they did a better job of playing with the lore than the new Star Wars show is doing. It's going to be interesting to see how they try to tie everything together, because right now it's just, to me, it seems like they're just throwing stuff against the wall. And just, okay, yeah, we're going to tie it into this thing, and we're going to tie it into this. It's like, wait. Because you're, like, kind of ruining things, and it's kind of like the whole thing with the Astari coming in the Second Age. It's like the Acolyte's almost like a whole show, just like that one plot point that is like, wait, we can't tie that together. Or the fact, having Halbrand be Sauron, and now, oh, well, wait, we have to get another Sauron to go back and finish making the rings, even though there's already a guy who was making rings already. So it's like, wait a minute. Unless they're going to, do the, Three's Company misunderstanding plot of, it's like, well, she's not here, therefore she doesn't know, therefore everybody misunderstands. It's like I keep saying, fingers crossed. We'll see how things go. So I'll be back next month because, like I said, I have the other ones in, and plus the 13th quote-unquote volume. Plus, right before we start with the Rings of Power, there's actually another book coming out which sort of ties in. I'll see if I can pick it up, and we'll maybe use that as an intro, and then we'll do like a recap, like, okay, what the heck happened last season, because it was 2 years ago already. There's some things people can't forget, but there are other little plot points we'll have to go over, including one character we're not going to be seeing at all this season. So we'll talk about that. So anyway, thanks for watching again. And like I said, I'll try to do a regular podcast just on the Conan story once that's out, because supposedly it's out next week, so I can read it and then recap the last 8 issues and see where it's going, and then maybe talk a little bit about the mini-series that they're going to have in the fall. Thanks again.